This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Ryan Rastok, Forest Health Coordinator at Kansas Forest Service, begins the show with information for people about emerald ash borer and how it is important to be proactive and watchful for this beetle. The new Center of Vaccine Evaluation and Alternative for Antimicrobials Director, Jishu Shi, continues the show to discuss what the center intends to do. We are also joined by Mary Marsh from Kansas Wheat. Concluding today's show is Douglas County Horticulture and Natural Resources Extension Agent, Dr. Sharon Ashworth, as she provides a preview of the August K-State Garden Hour presentation on the ecological benefits of native plants. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we continue our show now discussing something that's been in Kansas for a while, but kind of needs some more information on, as it might be getting in a few more places in Kansas, and that is emerald ash borer. And to talk about it, we have Kansas Forest Service Forest Health Coordinator Ryan Rastok. Ryan, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm pretty excited to talk about this.
Emerald ash borer. Why are we talking about it once it's been here for so long already?
Yeah, so we're talking about it, I think, today to continue to bring the awareness of the issue. It's been in the state for about 11 years, since 2012, and we continue to find it in new places about every year. And it's a pretty devastating insect. The larval stage kills trees and is expected to kill, 99% or pretty much all of our ash trees throughout the state. And as we're starting to detect it in new communities, we just want to keep people aware that it is an ever-present issue and it's expanding into other communities that they're going to have to deal with eventually.
And so when people are out looking at their trees and inspecting them and making sure everything looks good, what is something they want to watch for, or what does this look like so they can watch for it?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, it's only in ash trees, and so in fraxinus, and so we do get some confusion sometimes with folks thinking mountain ash and prickly ash and those things are susceptible. Those hosts aren't susceptible, so the only thing that they're going to get in and damage would be the green and white ash here in Kansas and other states, some other ash species in the fraxinus genus. And so, first of all, if you have an ash, and then what you're going to be looking for initially in the stages is they'll colonize the tree from the top and then move their way down. And so you'll start to see some stunted foliage early on, a little bit of tip dieback, and it'll kind of grind its way down the tree. And after a while, you might even start to see some splits in the bark from the larval feeding and actually see some of the tunneling when it splits open, or some woodpeckering as the woodpeckers kind of ascend upon the tree and then pull out the larvae as they peck in there and try to get some, juicy morsels out of there. And then the tree eventually dies. It starts sprouting, and then at that point, it's pretty conspicuous of what's happening. So,
and it doesn't really matter how old or young this tree is.
No, it's usually about the size of the tree, and so there is a size threshold. I forget what that diameter is, but it's pretty small. And so young, old trees alike, they're all equally, susceptible to it. And I would say that there's some anecdotal differences in the rate of decline between your green and your white ash, both susceptible and both will die, but it seems that the green ash, for whatever reason, tend to die much more quickly than the white ash.
Most of this is focused in Northeast Kansas, but we're having this conversation for not if they come to see you or they might have them, but more of likely when they come to your property.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you brought that up because it's really, really important that we continue to use this active language, the when as opposed to if, because it has been here for over a decade. And so our memories tend to get short. We start to think about other things that are happening. And this is kind of some background noise that's going to move into your communities eventually. And then depending on how many ash trees you have in that community, or if you're a homeowner, if you have 1, 2, 3, or no ash trees, that impact is going to be different, but it will impact all the same.
And so not just agriculture producers, but people in communities in really concentrated areas.
Absolutely. Yeah. Residential, shade trees are a big issue because of the risk that they would pose as the trees begin to die, or just the cost associated with removal or protective measures for treatment. And in rural areas, if they had planted ash, for a windbreak or something like that, then will likely see some declines there. In some states like Iowa, where you've seen them planted extensively in windbreaks, you can see where they've been just kind of ravaged through those areas. And then out in the woodlands, of course, we're seeing mortality out there too.
So what is some of that proactive things that people could be doing?
So first of all is knowing what trees you have, being aware of what you have, if you're a community, making sure that you're out there aware that you probably have this resource and how much, because that way you can start to plan. And if you're a homeowner, knowing the trees on your property, and if you have an ash tree, then starting that plan so that you can make the decision whether to treat it and protect it or start budgeting for removal over time, because eventually that insect will make that decision for you by getting in there. If you don't pay attention, then your treatment options become limited, if not completely absent. And so just making sure you know what trees you have, if it's an ash tree, starting to make a plan.
Making that plan, what is the first step of, is it saving some money for when that tree has to be removed, or knowing your list of chemicals?
Absolutely both, right? And so some people, they just don't really want to deal with having to treat the trees. There are some extremely reliable options if you catch the tree soon enough, and we've got a publication on our website, kansasforest.org, in the forest health section that talks about the insecticidal options for treating for emerald ash borer. And so that has the more detailed list, but in general, we're talking about the most reliable and gold standard that we have currently to date is a trunk injection of a chemical emamectin benzoate, different trade names, and that will protect the tree for 2 to 3 years in some cases. And then there are some soil-applied chemicals that are a little less reliable, would need an annual treatment. And then there's some bark-applied insecticides, dinotefuran and things of that nature. But the unifying feature between any of those treatments is that you have to catch it before the tree starts to die. So one of the questions we get a lot, somebody calls us to look at a tree, it's 40% of it's dead. They wonder if they can treat it, and that dead will come back. Those dead limbs will not come back. They're just dead. So we need to be able to catch it in advance. And so, being able to determine if you want to treat it, and then if you want to treat it, determining how much that's going to cost if that's within your budget. And then if you're trying to budget for removals, they get more expensive as they become more dangerous and start to die in many cases. And so just kind of balancing that.
And at the beginning, I mentioned it's mostly focused in northeast Kansas currently, but that might not always be the case.
Absolutely. Eventually, it'll make it probably throughout the majority of the state where the species is growing. And where we've officially detected it, that's where it officially is. That doesn't mean that it's not other places that we haven't seen or found yet. And so if people, are aware of that, it's very possible we could go to a county and detect it somewhere else later this week or next year that's not in this contiguous northeast area. The reason being that the main vector movement of this is through firewood. Human-induced movement for long distances. And so if people are, cut down an ash tree in, say, Douglas County, where it's been for several years since 2015, and they take that infested material to western Kansas and that community has ash trees, then they're going to get emerald ash borer through that mechanism. And so it's possible there could be areas where it's established further away outside of that contiguous area, but we just aren't aware of it because it hasn't been brought to our attention.
And Ryan, at the Kansas Forest Service, you guys are wanting to track it and help people and figure out kind of a game plan to do it. And so what people are you wanting to reach out if they think they have it?
Absolutely. And so we're really, really looking, with this most recent detection in Franklin County, in that new county, we got a lot of interest and people reached out to us from the known infested area. So really what we're looking for this insect, doing our surveys and trying to get assistance outside of that area where we already know that it exists, so we can find it in those new locations and assist those landowners, homeowners, and community members in those areas. So if you get on our website, you'll be able to see a map of that 13-county area. Basically, if you're in that area, you can just be safely assume that it is there, in fact. And so, you'd be reaching out to, a private entity to help you, deal with that. But once, if you're outside of that zone, that's really what we're looking for to be able to help and assist with that.
You've mentioned your website a few different times now. And so can you repeat that one more time and all the information that they can find on there? Yeah,
so it's kansasforest.org, and then you can click the series of links to get in the forest health section. And then there's a whole emerald ash borer page. So you can see what the insect looks like as an adult, what it looks like as a larva, some of the tunneling that you might see beneath the bark, and then some of the dieback and other symptoms and treatment options as well.
And at the Kansas Forest Service, you guys have your website where people can learn a lot about emerald ash borer and other things. However, there is another opportunity for people to learn more.
Yeah, absolutely. With this new detection in Franklin County, we are going to be hosting a workshop there in the Wellsville Community Center in Franklin County over on 707 Locust Street, and that is on Wednesday, August 23rd. And so you can catch all those details on our website and come there in person. You can ask questions. We'll have samples for people to see and a lot of good experts in the room to help people understand more about this insect and why we care about it.
Is there a registration, or do people need to sign up somewhere?
There is a registration through our website that you can follow the links to make it there.
Is there a fee associated with this?
This is free to the community and no fees associated.
And so even if you're from Franklin County or a surrounding county or really anywhere, you're welcome to attend to learn more about the emerald ash borer.
Absolutely. We would encourage anybody interested to come to the event, especially if you're outside of that quarantine or that known infested zone.
So having presentations on learning more about emerald ash borer, but a place for you to also ask all the questions you could possibly have about this insect.
Absolutely. And I'll be there to answer as many as I can.
So if you're wanting to find more questions or have a ton of questions about this or probably the Kansas Forest Service towards the end of it, Ryan will be there to answer all of your questions possible.
Absolutely. I love it.
And so we've talked obviously a lot about emerald ash borer today, but that's not all Kansas Forest Service has to offer producers and people in Kansas.
Oh, absolutely. We have people working diligently with landowners through our rural forestry program. We have folks working through our community forestry program on community forestry with those communities, and our fire program, marketing utilization, conservation trees, and kind of the list goes on. And so we're doing a whole lot throughout the state pertaining to trees and safety.
Ryan, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and filling us in on some emerald ash borer.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
That was Ryan Rastok, Forest Health Coordinator with Kansas Forest Service. You can learn more about the emerald ash borer by going to their website at www.kansasforest.org. Or they have an upcoming meeting you can also attend on August 23rd in Wellsville, Kansas at the Wellsville Community Center. There is no fee to attend, but registration is required. I will link both of these resources in today's show notes on acttoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and now we want to talk about a new center in K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine. And then to talk about it, we have Professor of Vaccine Immunology in K-State's Veterinary Medicine and the center's new director. Jishu Shi, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
This new center is called the Center of Vaccine Evaluation and Alternatives for Antimicrobials. And so, Jishu, what is this new center?
So this is a service center. Both the industry and also organizations are interested in developing vaccines or use the vaccines. So you mentioned two parts. Is center on vaccine evaluation, and which is evaluate vaccines' safety and efficacy. But also we're interested in using vaccines as alternatives for antimicrobials. So that's why it's a long name for the center.
Two kind of different parts there. And so what are you really hoping to do in this center?
What we're hoping to do is we're hoping to help the vaccine developers to help them evaluate the safety and efficacy of the vaccines for animals. And the other part, we're trying to help the farmers actually to reduce the use of antimicrobials for animal production. But in that sense, we want to find alternatives. One of them are is the vaccines, but also other potential alternatives for antimicrobials in food animal production.
And one thing you mentioned also was wanting to be a place to have evaluation.
Yes. This is where the uniqueness of our center is. We're at Kansas State University. So we have this Biosecurity Research Institute, you probably heard, and that's a high containment facility. So only very few campuses in the U.S., even for that matter, around the world, can do some of the studies we can do here. So that's why we can evaluate certain vaccines that only us can do that. So we're fortunate to have the facility to do that. Those are the transboundary animal diseases.
And Jishu, one thing that has been important to you is African swine fever disease, and hopefully doing a little bit of work with that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's correct. African swine fever disease is one of the diseases that we're working on, and that also can be done at the BRI I mentioned. Our interest there is twofold. One is to develop a safe and efficacious vaccine that can be used for farmers to protect their swine production. And the other one is find diagnostics tools that's sensitive, convenient, easy to use, so they can detect. Right now, the U.S. does not have African swine fever. So just want to make sure, no panic. We want to keep it that way, so we develop tools to detect them and also potentially to protect us in case it is come to this part of the world.
Sounds like focusing on things that maybe aren't currently a problem, but helping to prepare and create a better forward-looking industry.
Yes, exactly. But we do need to protect our industry. Swine industry is a very much a big industry in the U.S. from animal agriculture standpoint, because very much export-oriented as well. But we are facing, if ASF come into this country, then we cannot export pigs anymore. So that's a big devastating disease. And it's not far from America. It's already in Dominican Republic and Haiti. So it's something we need to be really, I think USDA is doing a great job to make sure that it's not coming to here.
And you mentioned farmers a few times, and we're not talking about just farmers in Kansas or America, really around the world.
Absolutely. African swine fever is a disease that's not just in Africa anymore. It was discovered 100 years ago in Africa, but right now the big damage that this disease causes is in Asia and Europe. Asia in China, Vietnam, Philippines, South Korea, in those parts of the world that produce a lot of pigs, but also in Europe. Right now in Germany, Italy, and also former Eastern European countries like Romania, Russia, Ukraine. So those countries also have suffered a lot because of this disease.
This center is not just focused on African swine fever, but it's a good example for what the center wants to do.
Absolutely, you're right. So African swine fever is one of the transboundary animal diseases that we can help people around the world in terms of develop vaccines, diagnostic tools, and find ways to protect them from this disease.
And Jishu, now looking at the part of the center that's focusing a little bit more on antimicrobial resistance.
I think it's not difficult to understand. We need to, because of the development of antimicrobial resistance, that's an impact on human disease. A lot of people get hospitalized and find out they were very limited on antibiotic they can use. So one of the ways to reduce the risk of developing antimicrobial resistance is really reduce the use of antibiotics in human medicine, but also as well in veterinary medicine. One of the areas is food animal production. I think in the U.S. and in European countries, the use of antibiotics in just regular feed is significantly reduced or prohibited, but it's still not the case in many other parts of the world. So we need to, it's easy to say that we need to reduce the use, but we need to find alternatives where the disease or the bacteria had to be, controlled. So one of the ways we want to do is develop vaccines for those bacterial diseases, but also try to promote policy that to the government around the world that they need to support the development of alternatives, including vaccines for bacterial diseases.
This Center of Vaccine Evaluation and Alternatives for Antimicrobials, it's not just you, it is a full team. And so what are your first kind of goals you want to tackle?
Okay, yeah. We have, the center is at, as you mentioned, the College of Veterinary Medicine. We have, as right now, have 10 collaborating principal investigators. That means 10 professors. So not just me. So it's really a team are working on a whole group of diseases that we're interested in bacterial disease, viral disease, and vaccines, diagnostics, disinfectants. Yeah, those are the areas we're working on.
For producers in Kansas, what does this really mean for them?
For Kansas, I think we're very interested in to help. Obviously, we're at Kansas State University, so we want to help our farmers around the state and the country so we can help them to education-wise, what this is. If they have a question about certain diseases, definitely they can call us. They already know where to submit their diagnostic, samples, diagnostic lab. We're fortunate to have 3 professors from our diagnostic center as part of our center's PIs. So definitely we can help our farmers on the diagnostic and vaccines. Obviously, if they have questions about vaccines, especially swine vaccines or cattle vaccines, we can help them, explain to them why they need to use it or should they use it.
Jishu, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and discussing this new center in K-State's Veterinary Medicine College.
Thank you very much, Abby.
That was Jishu Shi, professor of vaccine immunology at K-State's College of Veterinary Medicine and the director of this new center. Before we cut to a break, we're now going to be joined by Mary Marsh from Kansas Wheat.
Kansas wheat producers endured months, if not years, of persistent drought conditions this growing season. But when the rain finally started to fall, it brought another biggest challenge to the wheat production: weeds. Now research from Kansas State University is seeking to help find new solutions to add to farmers' toolboxes as they battle the consistent and growing threat of post-emergent weeds. Weeds are a consistent problem with several different types and species that compete with wheat during the cropping system. When uncontrolled, research shows yields can take a 10 to 50% hit. Weeds at harvest time can mean significant delays if spraying was required before cutting, challenges in battling weeds taller than the wheat, and difficulties at the elevator with dockage and having to dry down green weeds in the bin. Wheat producers have access to two production systems specific to grass and broadleaf control: Clearfield wheat varieties that pair with Altitude FX3 herbicide, and Coaxium wheat varieties that pair with the Aggressor AX herbicide. These two wheat production systems are powerful, but Dr. Mithila Huglam, who leads the Weed Physiology Laboratory in the Kansas State Department of Agronomy, noted the importance of researching the next step in weed control in wheat to continue to provide additional options for wheat producers. To find the next addition to the weed control armory, Huglam teamed up with Dr. Asif Mohammed, chief scientist for the Heartland Plant Innovations, and Dr. Harold Trick, a K-State plant molecular biologist with more than 35 years of experience in plant genetic transformation. The trio and their research teams sought to assess the wheat germplasm for tolerance to additional herbicides that can be used for post-emergent weed control in wheat. Their initial focus was on the tolerance to the selective herbicides, Laudis and Calistio, both of which have been shown to effectively and efficiently control broadleaf and grassweed species, but neither of which are currently registered for use in wheat, either pre- or post-emergence. Support by funding from the Kansas Wheat Commission, Kansas Wheat Alliance, and the Kansas Crop Improvement Association, the 3-year research project assessed existing varieties, experimental lines, wild relatives, and mutant lines for the herbicide tolerance to these two active ingredients. A large collection of germplasm representing winter and spring wheat, as well as mutant lines, were tested for their response to Laudis and Callisto under greenhouse conditions. The results indicate that, similar to corn, which is naturally tolerant to these herbicides, the WW1 and WW2 wheat genotypes can break down these herbicides into non-toxic form by activity of certain herbicide-degrading enzymes. And the end goal of this extensive testing regimen is to identify exactly which genes help provide tolerance to these herbicides. Additionally, the team is also exploring CRISPR-based editing systems to pave the way to establish new herbicide-resistant varieties of wheat, the long-term aim of Huglam's research. These potential new lines of herbicide-resistant wheat still have a long time before they would show up in a seed catalog for producers to purchase and plant, but getting the groundwork right will result in even more powerful and targeted tools for producers. Learn more about the latest in wheat research and practice recommendations through Kansas Wheat RX at kswheat.com/wheatrx.
That was Mary Marsh from Kansas Wheat. We're now cutting to a short break on Agriculture Today, but we have more for you ahead.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. Native plants are growing in popularity in the home landscape. For the August 2nd K-State Garden Hour, Douglas County Horticulture and Natural Resources Extension Agent Dr. Sharon Ashworth will discuss the ecological benefits of native plants and how to successfully integrate native plants into the home landscape. Sharon, you'll be doing the next K-State Garden Hour on August 2nd, and you're going to be focusing on native plants in the home landscape. I'm assuming one of the advantages of having native plants is the fact that they're adapted to our climate.
That's correct. They are adapted. Native plants are those plants that have co-evolved with our environment here, with this region, with the plants and the other plants and animals in our area, along with the weather conditions and soil conditions and disease pressures. So they've all co-evolved in this particular niche.
When we think about native plants and getting them into the landscape, what are some things that we should keep in mind, I guess, in terms of maybe making selections?
Well, one thing to keep in mind about integrating native plants is that it's still the practice of right plant, right place. So if you have a sunny spot, you're going to need to find a native plant that likes the sun. Full sun is 6 to 8 hours. If you have part shade in your yard or garden, you're going to want to find the right plant. Another consideration for native plants is understanding their growth form. How tall is this going to get? How aggressively might it spread? So if you're looking to cover an area, then you might not be very concerned about how it will spread. But if you've got just a little space and you're putting it in with your other plants, already established plants, you're going to want to consider how aggressive that plant will be.
What would be something that you would maybe consider an easy start for somebody who's maybe looking to get more native plants into the home landscape?
Well, there are a couple really easy ones and that are fairly easy to find in garden centers. So if you have a full sunny yard, there are 3 plants I would recommend. So at a ground cover level, so really short plant, I would recommend rose verbena. It spreads a little bit, but certainly not aggressively. And it's got a bright pink flower. It's really beautiful and sort of blooms on and off throughout the season. For a medium height, I would go with yarrow or achillea. And that's a great beginner plant. And that attracts all kinds of pollinators. And then for the taller, an easy starter plant is your echinaceas, your coneflowers. Those are wonderful to have in the garden because not only do they provide resources for native insects, but also the birds love them in the fall.
Yeah, you've kind of talked about something here that we don't often think about, the fact that what we plant will also determine what comes to our yard to visit us.
Yes, exactly. And that's one of the benefits of planting native plants. So most of our plants in our landscape, a lot of the natives and non-natives, will attract a lot of insects and insect pollinators. But the native plants are able to attract those specialist species, like the specialists are little native bees. Native plants are great for attracting them to our gardens, those specialist species. And we need diversity in our landscape. That's what we're losing out in the wild. And by planting a diverse array of native plants in our landscape, we help support those species.
I know there's been a lot of discussion lately about how much water plants take. Do some of the native plants for Kansas require less water?
Oh, yes. Many of them. Our native plants, living in the prairie state, they evolved in this region, and they don't need a lot of water. They do not need as much water as your regular plants. In fact, when you plant the native plants, you want to water them in and make sure they're well established. But thereafter, unless we go through a really dry spell, which of course can happen, you just don't need to water them.
Well, I know the Kansas Garden Guide has a lot of information on really how to establish that landscape, so that might be another resource as well as just listening into your webinar.
Yes, I will have some maintenance suggestions, and we'll also talk about some of the other benefits of having native plants in your landscape.
That's Douglas County Horticulture and Natural Resources Extension Agent Dr. Sharon Ashworth with information on integrative native plants into the home landscape. She'll go deeper into that subject on the K-State Garden Hour on August 2nd. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.